Success often arrives long before control does. The world sees achievement, the individual feels expectation. For many high performers, especially those who start young, recognition becomes a contract they never consciously signed. Applause can open doors, but it can also narrow choices. Brooke Shields' career embodies this tension between fame and autonomy. She became a national figure before she had the power to define her own narrative, and much of her adulthood has been shaped by reclaiming that authority. Her story is not about scandal or spectacle. It is about what happens when public identity grows faster than private self-understanding, and the long, deliberate work of bringing those two back into alignment. For viewers who have spent decades building careers, managing reputations, and renegotiating priorities, this tension may feel familiar. If you value thoughtful career analysis over gossip, stay with us. Every career has a moment when visibility accelerates faster than preparation. For Brooke Shields, that moment arrived with Pretty Baby in 1978 and intensified with The Blue Lagoon in 1980. These were not small supporting roles. They were defining performances that positioned her at the center of national conversation, artistically, culturally, and morally. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Hollywood was navigating a post-New Hollywood era. Studios were experimenting with edgier material. Youth culture was marketable. Provocation often translated into publicity. Within that environment, Shields' early roles became lightning rods. She was not simply cast, she became symbolic. Her image was debated in mainstream media, discussed at dinner tables, and scrutinized in editorials. Recognition came fast, and it came loud. The breakthrough did exactly what breakthroughs are supposed to do: it opened doors. Major modeling contracts followed. High-profile interviews. Magazine covers. By her mid-teens, she was commanding substantial earnings and becoming one of the most recognizable young faces in America. In purely professional terms, it was an extraordinary ascent. But recognition is rarely neutral. When a performer becomes culturally symbolic, expectations harden quickly. Industry executives begin to see a brand, not a person. Audiences expect continuity, not evolution. The market rewards repetition. In Shields' case, the very visibility that elevated her also narrowed the range through which she could be perceived. She was associated with beauty, youth, and controversy, categories that sell, but also confine. For American viewers over 45, this dynamic feels less like celebrity gossip and more like professional memory. Many of you experienced a version of this in your own fields. Perhaps you became the closer, the technical expert, the reliable one. Your first major success defined how colleagues and superiors evaluated you going forward. Promotions came, but so did assumptions. And once a reputation solidifies, stepping outside it can feel like breaking an unspoken contract. That is the psychological cost of early recognition. It creates momentum, but it can also freeze identity at a single stage of development. In Hollywood at the time, young actresses were rarely granted the space to mature publicly without scrutiny. The industry prized youth while simultaneously preparing for its expiration. This contradiction placed unique pressure on performers who achieved fame early. Success was measurable: box office numbers, modeling fees, media coverage, but autonomy was harder to secure. The business incentives surrounding a rising star rarely prioritize that star's internal growth. Shields' breakthrough therefore represents more than a filmography milestone. It marks the beginning of a lifelong negotiation between visibility and self-definition. She had achieved what many aspire to: a national recognition, financial success, cultural relevance, before most people finish high school. Yet the question beneath the surface remained unresolved: who controls the narrative once it takes on a life of its own? In long careers, first breakthroughs are double-edged. They validate talent. They build leverage. But they also construct a professional identity that can be difficult to revise later. The earlier the recognition, the longer the shadow it casts. For those reflecting on decades of work, this stage is familiar territory. Early wins often set trajectories that take years to reassess. The courage required is not in achieving recognition, but in eventually redefining it. As we continue, consider your own first breakthrough. Did it expand your identity or quietly confine it? Stay with us as we explore how Brooke Shields began to confront that very tension. Fame is rarely static. It evolves, intensifies, and recalibrates public expectation in real time. For Brooke Shields, adolescence did not dilute visibility, it amplified it. As her early films turned her into a cultural symbol, the media environment around her became more aggressive, more interpretive, and more intrusive. Interviews were not simply about craft. They were about meaning. What did she represent? Was she empowerment? Exploitation? Provocation? When the press begins debating what you symbolize, the pressure shifts from performance to identity management. The danger in that stage of fame is not just scrutiny, it is simplification. An actor risks becoming permanently associated with a single role or era. In Shields' case, youth itself became the defining frame. She was discussed as an image first, an artist second. That imbalance can quietly limit professional longevity. If the industry decides who you are before you do, reinvention becomes uphill work. This is where strategic positioning matters. Rather than doubling down on perpetual celebrity, Shields made a decision that surprised many observers. She enrolled at Princeton University. In an industry that often rewards constant visibility, she chose temporary withdrawal. That move was not a rejection of fame. It was an attempt to widen her identity beyond it. The signal was subtle but powerful. She would not allow early notoriety to be her only credential. Many Americans who built long careers understand the necessity of that pivot. At some point, external validation stops being enough. Titles, bonuses, promotions, these markers matter. But without intellectual or personal expansion, they can start to feel hollow. Strategic repositioning is not about abandoning success, it is about preventing success from becoming confinement. Attending Princeton did not eliminate media pressure. Paparazzi attention followed her, and public fascination did not disappear. But the context changed. Education introduced a parallel narrative: Brooke Shields, the student. Brooke Shields, the thinker. Brooke Shields, the person developing outside the studio system. In professional terms, this was a diversification strategy. Hollywood history is filled with performers who struggle to escape the gravitational pull of their breakthrough roles. Some leaned into nostalgia. Others faded with shifting trends. The ones who endured often found ways to expand how they were perceived through education, production roles, advocacy, or genre shifts. Shields' decision fits within that pattern of long-game thinking. Many Americans who built long careers understand that reputation must occasionally be renegotiated. A mid-career certification, a new industry pivot, a move into leadership, these are not signs of instability. They are signs of strategic self-preservation. Without them, identity can fossilize. Yet repositioning comes with risk. The public may resist change. Industry stakeholders may prefer predictability. There is comfort in keeping someone exactly where audiences first loved them. The courage lies in accepting short-term uncertainty for long-term autonomy. For Shields, narrative control evolved gradually. She returned to acting, but in varied formats: television, theater, and later, authorship. By writing about her own experiences, including motherhood and mental health, she shifted the conversation from how she looked to what she thought. That transition reflects a deeper form of control, authorship over interpretation. Fame invites commentary. Strategic positioning shapes legacy. In midlife, the stakes of identity become clearer. Recognition may fluctuate. Trends shift. But autonomy, earned and defended, becomes the more durable achievement. As we move forward, consider this: in your own career, where did you actively redefine your narrative instead of letting circumstances define it for you? That question often marks the difference between temporary success and sustained relevance. Stay with us as we examine the next phase of that evolution. Expansion in a long career is rarely accidental. It is usually the result of accumulated experience meeting deliberate choice. For Brooke Shields, the next phase of her professional life was not about reclaiming youth or chasing the intensity of her early fame. It was about redefining the terms of participation. After returning to the industry post-Princeton, Shields did not confine herself to a single medium. She moved into television with series work, including the sitcom Suddenly Susan, and later appeared in recurring and guest roles across network and cable platforms. Television, particularly in the 1990s and early 2000s, offered something film often did not: continuity. A series role allows for character development over time and provides a different kind of audience relationship, less sensational, more sustained. This shift signaled an important strategic recalibration. Film had made her iconic, television made her consistent. That distinction matters. Icon status can be brittle. Consistency builds durability. By entering long-form television, Shields participated in a format that prioritized weekly engagement rather than cultural shockwaves. It diversified her resume and, more importantly, diluted the dominance of her early film image. When an actor accumulates varied credits across decades, the industry narrative expands. She was no longer simply the young actress associated with controversy. She was a working performer with range. Equally significant was her move into authorship. With the publication of her memoir Down Came the Rain, she stepped into a role that few actors fully leverage: primary narrator of their own story. Writing is not performance in the traditional sense. It is interpretation. By articulating her experience with postpartum depression, she reframed public conversation around her from aesthetics to advocacy. Authorship is a form of control. When a public figure writes, they reorganize the archive of their life. They choose emphasis. They contextualize past events. They convert speculation into testimony. In doing so, Shields subtly shifted the power dynamic between media and subject. Instead of responding to headlines, she generated them on her own terms. This pattern, expanding into new lanes while retaining core competencies, is familiar to many Americans with long professional arcs. A corporate executive may move into board service. A surgeon may transition into teaching. A small business owner may author a book or mentor others. These expansions do not reject the original identity, they reinforce it by adding dimension. Avoiding professional confinement requires intentional diversification. Another aspect of Shields' autonomy lies in longevity through adaptability. She embraced stage work, participated in fashion collaborations, and continued selective acting roles without overexposure. That balance reflects a sophisticated understanding of brand management. Visibility was no longer the default goal. Alignment was. In earlier phases of her life, exposure seemed inevitable. In this phase, it became selective. There is a psychological evolution embedded in that transition. Early career often focuses on proving oneself, accepting roles, maximizing opportunities, building credibility. Midlife and beyond shift toward curation. Which projects align with values? Which commitments sustain rather than deplete? The power to say no becomes as important as the ambition to say yes. For professionals over 45, this stage resonates deeply. Career control at this point is less about acceleration and more about stewardship. It is about protecting energy, reputation, and purpose. Shields' trajectory illustrates that autonomy is not seized in one dramatic moment. It is accumulated through education, diversification, authorship, and selective engagement. By widening her portfolio and narrowing her focus to projects consistent with her evolving identity, she avoided permanent typecasting. In doing so, she demonstrated that career longevity depends less on maintaining early image and more on expanding internal authority. Long careers are ultimately shaped not only by professional decisions, but by personal priorities. The difference between temporary fame and sustainable presence often lies in what an individual chooses to protect when the spotlight intensifies. For Brooke Shields, several personal turning points directly influenced the trajectory of her career. Her marriage to Andre Agassi in the late 1990s and their subsequent divorce marked a period of reassessment. Divorce, particularly when highly publicized, can destabilize professional focus. Yet in her case, it coincided with a broader internal shift, moving away from external validation and toward stability. Her later marriage to Chris Henshey and the decision to prioritize family life represented another recalibration. Motherhood does not automatically reduce ambition, but it frequently reorganizes it. After the birth of her first daughter in 2003, Shields experienced severe postpartum depression, an experience she later addressed publicly. The significance of that moment extends beyond personal hardship. It altered how she engaged with fame. Instead of concealing vulnerability to preserve image, she spoke openly. That choice signaled maturity in both identity and brand. She no longer seemed invested in being perceived as flawless. She appeared invested in being credible. For many Americans over 45, this stage of life carries similar recalibrations. Professional recognition remains important, but it no longer outranks health, family, or psychological well-being. The metrics of success evolve. Titles matter less than stability. Visibility matters less than authenticity. Sustainable fame depends on this shift. Another defining event occurred in 2021 when Shields suffered a serious leg injury requiring multiple surgeries and extensive rehabilitation. Physical vulnerability has a way of clarifying priorities. Recovery is slow, humbling, and resistant to image management. Public figures who navigate such experiences under scrutiny face a unique challenge: aging and healing in full view. Aging in public view requires a different kind of discipline. Youth-based celebrity can rely on novelty. Longevity requires integration. Rather than competing with younger generations for relevance, Shields appears to have embraced her current stage openly, participating in fashion campaigns centered on confidence, discussing midlife health, and maintaining selective acting roles. This approach reflects strategic acceptance rather than denial. She does not attempt to replicate her early persona. She reframes it. The narrative becomes continuity instead of contrast. There is also the matter of her mother's passing in 2012, which marked the end of a complicated and formative relationship. Without speculating on emotional motives, it is reasonable to observe that parental influence played a central role in her early career. After that chapter closed, her professional life seemed increasingly self-directed. For professionals who built long careers, this transition is deeply recognizable. Early in life, many of us operate within inherited expectations, family pressures, institutional cultures, economic realities. Later decades offer something different: authorship. The ability to determine pace, boundaries, and commitments. Sustainable reputation in midlife depends on alignment between internal priorities and external actions. Shields' trajectory suggests an increasing coherence between the two. She did not disappear from public life, nor did she overextend herself to remain central. She maintained presence without surrendering proportion. In American culture, where reinvention is often celebrated but aging is often resisted, this balance is instructive. Sustained respect rarely comes from constant reinvention alone. It comes from stability, candor, and measured visibility. The arc from early spectacle to steady adulthood reflects a larger truth: sustainable fame is less about remaining famous and more about remaining grounded. Fame can introduce you to the world. Only autonomy allows you to remain yourself within it. Brooke Shields' legacy is not defined by how early she became famous, but by how deliberately she learned to live beyond that early definition. Her career traces a pattern that many Americans, particularly those who have worked for decades, understand instinctively: success is only the beginning of the real work. What follows is management of reputation, of expectation, of self. Managing success requires more than talent. It requires pacing. In her early years, recognition accelerated before she had the authority to shape it. The industry, the press, and the public all contributed to constructing an image that traveled faster than her personal development. That dynamic is not unique to Hollywood. In corporate America, in medicine, in law, in entrepreneurship, early achievement can quickly solidify into permanent expectation. Promotions bring pressure. Visibility invites scrutiny. Momentum can quietly become obligation. The first lesson her arc offers is this: success must be stewarded, not simply celebrated. Without deliberate recalibration, achievement can lock identity in place. Shields' decision to pursue higher education, diversify mediums, and later write her own narrative demonstrates that managing success is an ongoing process. It involves stepping back as much as stepping forward. The second lesson centers on autonomy. Protecting autonomy does not require rejecting opportunity. It requires conscious negotiation. Throughout her life, Shields faced intense public definition. Yet over time, she shifted from subject to author, from being interpreted to interpreting herself. That movement reflects maturity rather than rebellion. It is the transition from reacting to circumstances to shaping them. For viewers over 45, autonomy carries particular weight. At this stage of life, professional competence is usually established. The deeper question becomes, on whose terms do I continue? Autonomy might mean declining certain roles, choosing projects aligned with values, prioritizing family, or speaking openly about personal challenges. It is less dramatic than early breakthroughs, but far more durable. The third lesson involves building sustainable careers. Sustainability is not about constant visibility. It is about adaptability paired with restraint. Shields' trajectory shows that longevity often depends on diversification, selective engagement, and acceptance of evolving identity. She did not attempt to freeze herself in her most famous era. She allowed growth, acknowledged vulnerability, and adjusted scope. There is also a broader cultural reflection here. American society often rewards intensity, fast rises, bold reinventions, dramatic headlines. But long careers are built in quieter increments. They are maintained through steady recalibration, thoughtful positioning, and disciplined self-awareness. In that sense, her life mirrors the arc of many professionals who quietly shifted from ambition-driven momentum to values-driven direction. A balanced perspective also recognizes that no public career unfolds without compromise. Every professional decision exists within institutional constraints. Shields operated within the structures of Hollywood, media, and commerce. Her autonomy evolved gradually, not perfectly. That gradual evolution may be the most realistic aspect of her legacy. Autonomy is rarely seized in one decisive act. It is accumulated through repeated choices over time. Ultimately, her story is less about celebrity and more about trajectory. It illustrates that identity can mature even under persistent scrutiny. It suggests that early definitions need not dictate final outcomes. For those reflecting on decades of work, the question her career raises is personal. Have you shaped your success, or has it shaped you? If this analysis resonates with your own professional journey, consider subscribing for more conversations about longevity, identity, and the architecture of lasting careers.